Michael Henderson hated the Monday morning briefing. Captain Bryce, the ever-politically correct bastard, was talking about cultural diversity and minority sensitivity again. 20 years on the Atlanta police force had taught Michael one thing. These guys didn't understand tenderness any more than pigs understood basic math. He furtively looked at his knuckles, covered with fresh abrasions from Saturday's arrest. The black guy talked too much about his rights. I had to explain it plainly, in language they would surely understand. And now for the statistics on the resettlement in our neighborhood. The captain's voice sounded increasingly annoyed. In the last quarter, the percentage of African American families has increased by 20%. I ask everyone to please take this to heart and... They're like cockroaches, Michael whispered to his partner Ricky. You poison one place, they go to another. First one, then a dozen, then the whole house is infested. The Celtic cross tattoo on his forearm itched. His grandfather said it was a sign. The enemy was somewhere nearby. Michael had always trusted that itch. It had never failed his grandfather during the raids of the 60s, or his father in the 90s. The old man liked to talk about how they cleaned up the streets of the city. Nowadays they would be called racists. But grandfather knew the truth. They were the keepers of order, the defenders of tradition. In the corner of the briefing room hung a picture of Grandpa, young, in a police uniform, against the background of the station. Next to it was a picture of my father receiving a long service award. Soon Michael's own portrait would hang there. 3 generations of Hendersons have protected the city from men like these. He came home in a bad mood. His street, his neighborhood, where he grew up, it was all changing. Old neighbors were leaving, selling their homes for next to nothing, and strangers were taking their place. Mrs. O'Brien, who lived across the street, had recently moved to Florida. Her house was bought by a family from Nigeria. Now in the evenings, it smelled of hot spices and the sound of their savage music. A moving truck was parked outside the house across the street. The first one he saw was a huge black man hauling a couch. Michael put his hand on his holster, a habit developed through years of service. And then he saw her, a slim figure in an ivory summer dress. She was commanding the move every now and then, flicking her unruly raven wing curls out of her face. Her voice, melodious with a slight southern accent, echoed down the street. Bile came to my throat. They never know their place. They act like they have a right to live here, to walk on these sidewalks, to breathe this air. That evening at the mailboxes, he bumped nose to nose with her. Her skin glowed dark gold in the setting sunlight. A thin gold chain glittered around her neck. She smiled, revealing flawless white teeth. Jasmine Taylor, your new neighbor. I just moved in. Michael mumbled something unintelligible and hurried away. But the smell of her perfume, sweet, spicy, like a summer night in New Orleans, haunted him all the way home. His temples pounded. His hands shook as he tried to get the key in the keyhole. At Joe's bar, a smoky den of local cops, he'd gotten methodically drunk. Joe's bartender, who knew his father, silently topped up the whiskey. He remembered how the elder Henderson used to come back from night duty in troubled neighborhoods. Can you believe it, Rick? That black bitch is smiling at me. Like she got a right to live here. Like she's an equal. He tipped another glass. In my neighborhood, across from my house. Ricky nodded understandingly, and Michael talked and talked, choking on bile and whiskey. And with each drink he remembered more and more how gracefully she tossed her hair, how her shoulders were golden in the sun, how her dress softly contoured her hips, how her hips swayed as she walked toward the house. At home, he threw up. He stood under the scalding hot shower for a long time, trying to wash away her scent, her image, his repulsive, treacherous attraction to her. His steaming skin flushed red. The tattoos showed especially clearly the Celtic cross, the runes, the symbols he'd believed in all his life, symbols of purity and superiority. On the fogged mirror, he inscribed with his finger, "They are not equal." But her smile still stood before his eyes. Grandfather was turning over in his coffin. Michael was sure of it. In the bedroom, he pulled an old photo album out of the closet. Here was Grandpa at a rally for segregation. Here was Dad as a young man. In the background, a burning neighborhood after the riots. The history of the family, the history of the struggle. And he couldn't stop thinking about the way she said his name. Michael didn't fall asleep until the morning, exhausted by whiskey, shame, and the dirty, haunting visions. Watching Jasmine's house became a new ritual for Michael. Every morning, at 7:30, she went for a jog. Light shorts, tight t-shirt, her hair, gathered in a tight ponytail, bounced to the beat of her steps. Michael sat in his car around the corner, clutching the steering wheel with white fingers, hating himself for the way his eyes followed her every move. At 8:15, she'd come out again, in her teacher's dress and shoulder bag, get into her used Ford, and drive to Maple Grove Elementary School. Michael found out. She taught 2nd grade. He shuddered at the thought of her teaching white kids. Tuesdays and Thursdays after work, she went to the grocery store on the corner of Oak Street. On Wednesdays, she'd meet her friends at the Bluebird Cafe. Michael knew her routes by heart. He told himself he was following her out of a sense of duty. He needed to know what the enemy was up to, but somewhere deep inside he knew it was a lie. One day at the supermarket, he deliberately pushed her cart with his. Oranges scattered, rolled across the floor. She knelt down, picking up the fruit, and Michael felt his breath catch. Her hands, graceful with long fingers, flashed among the orange orbs. "Forgive my clumsiness." He didn't recognize his own voice. "That's okay, Mr. Henderson," she smiled, and something clenched in his chest. "Try to be more careful next time." She remembered his name. Of course she remembered it. He's a cop. Everyone knows him in the neighborhood. But that simple fact made him dizzy. That night, for the first time, he caught himself imagining her lips, her skin, her touch. Rage came over him in a wave. He smashed the bathroom mirror, cutting his hand. Blood mixed with the water, pink trickles flowing down the drain, and he kept standing under the shower, trying to wash away those thoughts, that desire. "They're dirty," he whispered over and over. "They're not like us. But the image of Jasmine picking oranges haunted him even in his dreams. The chance encounters became more frequent. Michael learned to calculate his timing so that he would find himself near her, at mailboxes, near garbage cans, at the local supermarket. Every time she smiled at him openly, friendly, he hated that smile, hated the way she made him feel. At the Bluebird, he took a table by the window. Her favorite corner was clearly visible from here, where she met up with her friends, the same black teachers. They were laughing, discussing their business. Michael sipped his coffee as he listened to Jasmine's melodic voice. "Why don't you join us, Officer Henderson?" Her question caught him off guard. "You're sitting so lonely." He wanted to refuse, should have refused, but his feet carried him to their table on their own. The next hour became torture. 3 pairs of dark eyes watched him with curiosity. They talked about school, about children, about books. Jasmine appeared to be well-read. That pissed him off especially. They shouldn't be smart. Shouldn't be like this. "You know so much about classic literature." Her voice sounded surprised. "My mother taught English," he gritted through his teeth. All he didn't say was that his mother would curse him if she knew who he was sitting at the same table with. In the evening, he took a long soak in the bathtub, rubbing his skin furiously with a washcloth, as if trying to peel away the very memory of the day. The Celtic cross on his forearm seemed to throb, reproachful, warning. And then there was dinner with his father, a weekly ritual in the house where he'd grown up. Old Henderson had aged, but his gaze remained just as sharp. "What's going on with you, son?" His father set his fork aside. "You haven't been yourself lately." "It's okay." Michael avoided his gaze. "Is it because of the new neighbor?" There was steel in his father's voice. "I heard a colored girl moved in with you." Michael flinched. His father had always been able to read him like an open book. "Stay away from her." The elder Henderson rose from the table. "Remember who you are. Remember what your grandfather and I fought for." That night, Michael dreamed about his grandfather. He stood there in his uniform, just like in that old picture, and shook his head. "You dishonor our blood," he said. And then his face turned into Jasmine's, and Michael woke up in a cold sweat. The next morning he sat in the car again, watching her jog. Something dark was growing inside him, a mixture of lust and disgust, desire and hatred. He realized he was going crazy, and he couldn't stop. In the rearview mirror, he saw his face, drained, with dark circles under his eyes. "You're sick," he whispered to his reflection. "You're fucking sick." And Jasmine ran down the street, the morning sun golden on her skin. The station noticed a change in his demeanor. Ricky no longer called him to the bar in the evenings, as if he sensed something wrong. Sergeant Donovan started assigning him paperwork instead of patrols. "You've been a little jumpy lately, Henderson," he said. Michael had indeed gotten twitchy. On his last report, he'd written Taylor 3 times instead of trespasser. Then he scribbled on the paper for a long time until he tore it to shreds. He started collecting her things. First, it was an accidentally dropped store receipt. Then it was a used movie ticket picked up outside her car. One night, he climbed onto her porch and stole a newspaper. Her hands touched those pages. At home, he had a box. It held pictures taken furtively on his cell phone. Jasmine outside the school, Jasmine in the park, Jasmine watering flowers on her porch. Sometimes he'd pull them out and spread them out on the table like evidence in an investigation. Something in him was broken. He knew it. At the church he went to every Sunday, the priest talked about sin. Michael sat in the last pew, clenching his fists so that his nails dug into his palms. After the service, he knelt for a long time, begging for forgiveness. For what exactly, he didn't know. And then the thing he feared most happened. She spoke to him herself. Not just a casual greeting, a real conversation. "You know, Officer Henderson," she said, leaning against the fence between their houses, "I see you a lot in the mornings. You probably run too, don't you?" The lie stuck in her throat. Her eyes, dark as a southern night, looked straight at him. "Why don't we run together sometime?" There was genuine friendliness in her voice. "They say any workout is more effective with a partner." He stared at her lips, at the curve of her neck, at the slender fingers rubbing a strand of hair, something inside twisted in a tight spring. "Yeah, think about it," he squeezed out, and fled into the house. That night he drank himself into oblivion, smashed all the pictures of his ancestors on the wall. In the morning he found the shards mixed with blood from his cut hands. Only dark stains remained on the white wall, like traces of his shame. The phone was ringing off the hook with calls from his father. Michael didn't answer. He sat in the dark, listening to Jasmine play music in her house. The soft sounds of jazz seeped through the walls, poisoning his mind. He was being pulled deeper and deeper. He knew this was going to end badly. It had to end badly. It couldn't be otherwise, but he couldn't stop now. It had all started with that run together. Michael had agreed, hating himself for his weakness, but unable to refuse. The July morning was filled with humid heat, his t-shirt clinging to his body. Jasmine ran easily, her breathing staying even as he gasped beside her. At one point, she turned around, smiling. "Tired, officer? Why don't we take a break?" They stopped in the shade of an old oak tree, and drops of sweat rolled down her neck, disappearing into the hollow between her collarbones. Michael looked away, but it was too late. The image was imprinted in his memory, haunting him for days and nights. After that, there were other meetings. Casual conversations gradually turned into long conversations on her porch. She talked about her students, about the books she was reading, about jazz concerts. He listened, mesmerized by the music in her voice, and something dark, painful, hunger-like grew inside him. Every night he swore to himself that this was the last time, that tomorrow he would end this madness. And every morning he sought to see her again. There were whispers in the station. He caught the stairs, noticed how conversations broke off when he appeared. Ricky tried to bring it up once. "Look, old man, people talk. It's like you've been obsessed lately. It's because of that black..." Michael slammed him into the wall, and only the intervention of the other officers prevented a fight. After that incident, the whispers grew louder. Jasmine didn't seem to notice his internal struggle, or the growing tension. To her, it was simple. Two neighbors who became friends despite their difference in age and lifestyle. She didn't see him clench his fists when her black friends walked by. She didn't know he spent hours in the shower at night trying to wash away the memories of her hand touching his shoulder, the occasional smile, the smell of her perfume. One night she took him out to dinner. Nothing special. she said. "Just a few friends getting together. I think you'll find it interesting." He had to decline. Knew he should. But he agreed, and that decision was the beginning of the end. Jasmine's house smelled of spices and something sweet. The guests had already gathered 4 of her friends, all black. A sociology professor from the local college, a journalist, a jazz club owner, and his wife, an artist. Michael felt like he was trapped. They talked about art, politics, social justice. Jasmine glowed as she introduced him. "This is Michael, my neighbor. He's a police officer." "Oh, how interesting," Professor James perked up. "I'm just working on a study about racial profiling in law enforcement. What do you think about this problem, Officer Henderson?" Michael felt bile coming up to his throat. "I think some people complain too much instead of enforcing the law." "Michael..." There was a warning in Jasmine's voice, but he couldn't stop now. "Do you know how much crime is committed in black neighborhoods? How many drugs, robberies, murders, and you all sit here and talk about profiling?" There was a heavy silence. Jasmine looked at him with widened eyes, as if seeing him for the first time. "I think we should go." The journalist rose, dragging the others with him. When it was just the 2 of them, Jasmine spoke softly, a tremor in her voice. "So this is how you really think, all this time." "What did you think?" he burst out. "That I'm one of those liberal assholes who forgot who they are? I know who I am, and I know who all of you are. Get out of my house." Her voice became hard. "Immediately." "Does it really cut your eyes?" He took a step toward her. "Thought you could tame a white cop? Make him forget where he belongs?" "Don't come near me." She retreated to the phone. "I swear I'll call the station." "And what are you going to tell them?" He laughed hoarsely. "That your white neighbor turned out to be a racist? You think anyone cares about that?" "You're sick," she whispered. "God, how blind I've been." "No." He was suddenly calm. "You're the one who made me sick. You and your black magic, but it's over with. Get out." Jasmine held the phone like a shield. "Or else I'll really call." Michael stood looking at her, so beautiful in his anger. The dark blue dress emphasized the golden hue of her skin. He hated her for that beauty, for the way it got under his skin, poisoned his thoughts. "You know what the worst part is?" His voice sounded almost calm. "I wanted you, didn't I? Every night I thought about you, about your lips, your skin, waking up in a sweat, hating myself for those thoughts." "You're crazy," she trailed off. "A real psycho. And you teased me. You're all like that. Tease, seduce, and then play the insulted innocence game." The phone in her hand came to life. Someone was calling. Michael whipped the machine out with lightning speed, grabbed her wrists. "It hurts." She tried to break free. "Let me go!" I tried to fight it. He pulled her closer, inhaling the scent of her perfume. "God, how I tried. Help!" Her scream cut through the silence of the house. "Somebody!" He clamped his palm over her mouth. Pure terror splashed in Jasmine's eyes. Somewhere in the back of the house, a phone, now a landline, was ringing. The sound of breaking glass. Had one of the neighbors heard the scream? "Hush," he whispered. "Shh, baby. It's going to be okay." What happened next blended into one blood-red fog for him. Her resistance, the tearing of her dress, his hands on her skin, so soft, so hateful. The screams turned into moans, the struggle into a whole other movement. And then the hatred swept over him again, flooded his consciousness. He beat her without feeling his hands, without hearing her pleas. He beat her until she was silent. For a moment he stopped, looking at her, naked, bloody, motionless on the living room floor. Jesus. His own voice sounded foreign to him. Jesus. He flew out of the house as he was, in a tattered shirt with bloody hands. He got into his car, started the engine. His face flashed in the rearview mirror, pale, mad-eyed. From somewhere in the distance came the wail of police sirens. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he whispered into the darkness. "I couldn't." In the morning, detectives found Jasmine Taylor's body in her living room. On the wall, a single word had been written in blood. Sinner. Detective Mona Ramirez wrinkled her nose at the smell of blood lingering in the stuffy living room. The body of a young black woman lay by the couch, partially covered by the scraps of a blue dress. The forensics team was already at work, methodically capturing every detail. The writing on the wall, "Sinner," glistened in the light of their flashlights, red-brown against the light-colored wallpaper. Victim is Jasmine Taylor, 27 years old, elementary school teacher. Detective Marcus Johnson flipped through a notepad. A neighbor called the police around 4 in the morning, heard screaming, but when the patrol officers arrived, there was no one else in the house. Signs of a struggle? Ramirez looked around the room. Everywhere. Overturned chairs, broken vase, multiple contusions and bruises on the body. Misa's death was caused by head trauma. One hard blow. There were 5 unfinished glasses on the coffee table, dinner leftovers on plates, an open bottle of wine. She had guests. Ramirez reached for the picture on the wall. A group of smiling people, all black except for one. Who's that white man next to her? We're already finding out. Neighbors say he's been here a lot lately. In the hallway, the forensics expert beckoned them over. Detectives, take a look. There's blood on the door. Someone grabbed the handle with a bloody hand. And here on the floor, boot prints. Big size, men's. The tread marks are clear. Johnson squatted down. Looks like police boots. Ramirez nodded. Question all the neighbors. Anyone who might have seen or heard anything. And find me that white male in the picture. By noon, a picture began to emerge. Mrs. O'Brien had seen a group of people from a nearby street drive up to Jasmine's house around 9 p.m., decent-looking, well-dressed, a professor from the local college, his wife, 2 others, and a white male, tall, kept to himself. Officer Michael Henderson. Johnson put his personnel file on the table. 20 years on the force, several reprimands for excessive force in an arrest, 3 complaints of racial discrimination, all closed for lack of evidence. What do the other guests say? Ramirez scrutinized Henderson's picture in his personnel file. Professor James claims the evening started out normally, but then Henderson exploded, started talking some racist nonsense. They left around 10. Leaving her alone with an aggressively racist cop? They say she insisted, said she could handle it. The lab's starting to get the first results. Semen traces on the couch, blood samples from various places in the house. Some didn't match the victim's blood type. On the kitchen table, a palm print with a distinctive scar. Henderson has that scar. Johnson showed a photo from his personnel file. Got it on a bust 5 years ago. We taking him? Ramirez shook her head. Something's not right here. Look at the time periods. The neighbor heard screams at the beginning of the 1st in the morning. Uniforms arrived at 1:15. No one. Body was discovered at 4 a.m., and the expert puts the time of death between 2 and 3. You think someone came in after Henderson? We should check the cameras on the neighboring streets and find her cell phone. It's got to be around here somewhere. At that moment, the CSI peeked into the office. Detective Ramirez? We found something in the victim's bedroom. You'd better see it. Jasmine's bedroom was chaos. An overturned lamp, crumpled bedding, scattered clothes. There were overturned bottles of perfume on the dressing table, powder scattered on the dressing table, and in the midst of the mess, a cell phone, screen down. Last call, the CSI handed Ramirez a printout. 1:45, number registered to Marcus Taylor. Relative? Brother. Works as a mechanic at an auto shop across town. Ramirez crouched on the edge of the bed, looking around the room. Something caught her eye, a barely visible dark spot on the light-colored carpet by the window. She leaned closer. There was someone standing here with wet shoes, a very different tread from the front door. Johnson photographed the footprints. And look at the blood spatter on the wall. 2 different patterns. The first is wide, haphazard. The second is directional, as if from a single hard blow. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. A new group of forensic scientists had arrived. One of them was carrying a transparent bag with something metallic inside. Found it in the dumpster behind the house. He held the bag out to the detectives. A wrench. It's got the victim's blood and hair on it. Ramirez glanced over to Johnson. You said the brother works as a mechanic? Already going through the security cameras. Johnson pulled out his cell phone. Got a lead. At 2 in the morning, a camera at a gas station 3 blocks from here caught a pickup truck registered to the shop where Marcus Taylor works. 2 killers. Ramirez stood up. The first one beat her up and raped her, but she survived. She managed to call her brother and he... Detective, came the voice of an expert from the bathroom. There's a note here, in the laundry basket, all crumpled up. Looks like the victim's handwriting. The note was written in hurried, trembling handwriting. Michael Henderson. If anything happens to me, it's him. God, I'm such an idiot. Time of death, between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. Ramirez laid out the facts like cards. A wrench from the machine shop. A call to his brother. And here's the interesting thing. Neighbors heard 2 different screams. The first was female, around 1 o'clock in the morning. The second was male, rough, closer to 2 o'clock. At that moment, a young officer burst into the office. Detectives, the precinct just called. Michael Henderson came in on his own. He's turning himself in. Let him wait. Ramirez pulled on her gloves, smoothing out Jasmine's note. Johnson, find me that brother, and check all the cameras along the route from his house to the crime scene. Tech sent a transcript of the deleted messages from the victim's cell phone. The last one sent to his brother a few days before the murder. Marcus, I need to talk to you. I met someone. You're going to be mad, but... The message was cut off halfway through. She still hadn't told her brother about Henderson. Detective, the CSI appeared in the doorway. The blood work showed an oddity. There are 2 types of impact marks on the victim's body. The first are indiscriminate, inflicted by hand. The second is methodical with something heavy. The immediate cause of death was the final blow to the back of the head, with a wrench. Ramirez folded the papers into a folder. Let's go to Henderson. I think he has an interesting story for us. And the brother? An extraction team is already on its way to see him. She looked at the picture of Jasmine Young, beautiful, smiling. 2 people, 2 hates. Each believed they had the right to pass judgment. You know what the worst part is? She turned to Johnson. One was killing her for being black, the other for daring her to love a white man. Messages from Marcus Taylor's cell phone told their own story. A week before the murder. Sis, I saw you with that white man. What are you doing? It's none of your business, Marcus. Remember what they did to Mama? Have you lost your mind? Ramirez set the printouts aside. Check the Taylor family history. What happened to their mother? An hour later, a 20-year-old police case lay on her desk. The beating of a black woman by a group of white police officers, Michael Henderson's father among them. The woman survived, but was left crippled. The case was dropped. That's why the brother got so pissed off. Johnson ran his hand over his face. His sister is fucking the son of one of those cops. In the interrogation room, Henderson finally looked up. He was shaking. I loved her. His voice was hoarse. God, how much I loved her, and hated her for making me love her, for ruining everything I believed in. He fell silent, looking at his hands. Yesterday, it was like an obsession. She was standing there, so beautiful, so clean, and me, dirty, filthy. I wanted to destroy her. I wanted her to suffer, for daring to get under my skin. Ramirez waited silently. We had a fight. Then it turned into something else. I kissed her and hit her at the same time. I wanted her and hated myself for wanting her. And she cried and clung to me like I was her salvation, not her curse. His shoulders shook. When it was over, I looked at her. Bloody, naked, so beautiful. I thought I'd killed her. I wanted to kill her. But I couldn't finish her. Just walked away. Check his story. Ramirez unfolded a map of the city. Where was his car seen by the cameras? In the corner, the TV was running quietly. Suddenly, Johnson turned up the sound. Look. The news was showing an auto repair shop. The reporter was saying something about a shooting. The camera caught a familiar face, Marcus Taylor, handcuffed, being led to a police car. They found bloody clothes in his workshop. Johnson read a message from his phone. And a wrench, just like the murder weapon. Ramirez stood up. Time to talk to Henderson another way. Now we have something to push. We've got Marcus Taylor. Ramirez placed a picture in front of Henderson. He's in interview room 2 right now. He has a different version of the events of that night. Henderson didn't even look at the picture. He was shaking. I should have realized. He ran his palm over his face. When I left, she was still breathing. I heard, but I didn't want to believe it. Thought I was imagining it. She called her brother. Johnson opened a folder of call printouts. At 1:45, had time to tell him about you. About us, Henderson laughed bitterly. You know what the funny thing is? I really loved her, didn't I? First time in my life. The first time I really loved her. And it had to be her, a black woman. My grandfather must be in his grave. Tell me about her brother. Marcus, I've never seen him. Only knew he was there, she said he was. And that he was really pissed off about the white cops. Something happened to their mother. Henderson froze as if he'd been struck. Oh my God, he whispered. Was it my father? That incident with their mother, my father did that? Ramirez silently held out an old police file to him. Henderson ran his eyes over the first page and covered his face with his hands. Now you understand, Ramirez said quietly. Why it wasn't just a betrayal for her brother. It was as if she'd gone to bed with the devil, Henderson finished. But I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. In the adjoining interrogation room, Marcus Taylor sat staring at the wall. His hands, calloused, with machine oil embedded under his fingernails, rested on the table. His knuckles were bunched. She was my little sister. His voice sounded muffled. When the cops mutilated Mom, Jasmine was 7. She didn't remember everything. I remembered, though. I remembered Mom screaming, how those bastards laughed. He slowly looked up at Ramirez. When she called that night, I didn't realize right away. She was wheezing, gasping, and then she said Michael Henderson, and I remembered that last name. You went to her place. She opened the door, bloody, naked. And you know what I saw in her eyes? Not shame, not remorse. She looked like she was possessed. I'm sorry, she said. I love him. Marcus ran his palm over his face, smearing sweat. That wasn't my sister. Not the girl I raised after my mother. It was some creature in her body. Tainted, filthy. She let their evil into her, willingly let it in. His voice trailed off into a croak. I had to purify her, do you understand? Had to save her soul. She betrayed everything, our mother, our blood, our struggle, bound herself to the devil in the flesh, the son of the very same. And you took the wrench. I freed her, he whispered. Freed her soul from the filth. Ramirez gathered the team in the conference room. On the whiteboard were photos, printouts, diagrams, the story of 2 families bound by hatred 20 years long. Michael Henderson confessed to assault and rape. Marcus Taylor confessed to murder. The case can be closed. She was quiet. But there's something else. Johnson laid out the new documents. We pulled up old records. The story with the Taylor's mother is not an isolated incident. Henderson's father and his partners. They had a string of attacks like this. Everything was shut down, complaints ignored. The circle has closed. Ramirez stepped up to the board. 20 years ago, white cops mutilated a black woman. Years later, her daughter fell in love with the son of one of those cops. And she died, not at his hands, but at the hands of her own brother, for daring to cross the line. There was a noise in the hallway. Henderson Sr. was being brought in on old charges. He walked with his head held high, still proud, still sure he was right. You have dishonored our family, he threw to his son as he passed the interrogation room. Michael didn't even look up. The prison chapel smelled of dust and old wood. Michael Henderson sat in a pew, staring at a crucifix. He was shaking after yesterday's visit. She had come unannounced, a tall woman with gray hair and a strong-willed face. Sitting down across from him, she placed a photograph on the table. I am Margaret O'Brien. 25 years ago, my husband and I adopted a baby girl, Jasmine. Michael couldn't take his eyes off the picture, a little black girl in a white communion dress, between 2 red-haired Irishmen, so out of place, so happy. She never hid the fact that she was adopted, proud of both families, us and the Taylors, when their mother. After the police incident, Jasmine spent every weekend with them. We didn't forbid it. We thought it was the right thing to do. Michael was silent. There was a lump in his throat. Do you know what she said about you? Mom, I hate people like him. I hate those arrogant white bastards in uniform. But him, I love him for some reason. And I know he hates people like me too. Maybe that's why we found each other. Margaret put her hand on the table, white, in age spots. She grew up between two worlds, Michael, between two hates, and in each of them she was her own, and a stranger at the same time. Michael clenched his fists. A Celtic cross was visible beneath the rolled-up sleeve. We adopted another girl, Margaret rose. A black orphan. She wants to be a teacher, like Jasmine. Michael sat in the chapel until dawn. Somewhere in another wing of the prison, Marcus Taylor sat in his cell. Maybe he was awake too. Maybe he too was thinking about her, the girl who grew up between worlds, trying to connect the unconnected, and falling into the chasm between them. There was a whole life ahead of her. A life with the memory of a woman who hated his world as much as he hated hers. And yet they loved each other. Until death. Until she died. She was wrong. Or was she?